The world is changing and changing fast. We constantly need to navigate new apps, platforms, skills, and attitudes. But some things need to change.
We've been running companies the same way since the Industrial Revolution, when we made them purely for the purpose of doing the same thing over and over at scale as efficiently as possible.
It was based on Ford and the production line. The Fordist approach was about pure efficiency, speed of production, lowest cost. All Fords were black because black paint dried quickest. That whole construct is a dead construct, really. It belongs to a previous era.
In 1956, the Pension Funds Act was passed in South Africa, introducing legislation to govern the industry. That too has needed a few updates to keep up with the times.
Now, starting from September 1st, South Africans can access their retirement savings through the two-part retirement system that follows President Cyril Ramaphosa's signing of the Pension Fund Amendment Bill. The system allows workers to access a small portion of their retirement savings before retirement for emergencies, promoting preservation and aiding those struggling to make ends meet. Now, members can...
Will this be enough to help South Africans preserve their savings for an income after employment? What will retirement look like for the next generation? Welcome to the Big Business Insights podcast, brought to you by Old Mutual Corporate. I'm your host, Blessing Utete, the Managing Executive at Old Mutual Corporate Consultants. By meeting thought leaders and visionaries across sectors, looking at the past, the present, and the future, we aim to give business leaders the 360-degree advantage. Our guest today will help us navigate the changing world and help us imagine what the challenges and opportunities might be for work and life after work in the future. Dr Bomikazi Zeka is the Associate Professor in Finance and Financial Planning at the University of Canberra. Bomikazi's research interest is in the economic outcomes of previously disadvantaged individuals, particularly women, people of color, and older adults. Thank you for joining us today, Bomikazi.
I'm delighted to join you. Thank you for having me.
Dion Chang is the founder and CEO of Flux Trends, a respected trend analyst. Dion specializes in identifying unexpected business opportunities within shifting trends. Welcome, Dion.
Hi, Blessing, and hello to all the listeners. Thanks for having me.
Maybe just to start off, you two come from very different backgrounds, but we wanted to get your unique perspectives to explore this topic. Bomikazi, as things stand, less than 10%, in fact, it said 6% of South Africans are adequately prepared for retirement. Why is this, and is it a global phenomenon?
Absolutely. This isn't something that's unique to the South African context because planning for retirement has always been so much more complicated than putting money into a retirement fund, right? There's a level of financial sophistication and financial literacy that comes with it, such as, understanding how your fund works, how the contributions are made into the fund, the investment structure, the tax implications, the fees that are involved. And so we assume that if you put money into your fund, you'll be okay. But that's only one part of the process. And I think that's the operative word here, is that it's a process that needs to be undertaken. It's not a once-off activity. So there's a high level of active engagement that comes with it. And from a behavioral point of view, I think that these statistics really reflect how retirement planning is put off for two reasons. The first is that there's no immediate reward for doing it, but there's also no immediate penalty for not doing it. So with all of the competing demands that come with, life today, it's so easy to put it off, but then there's the missed opportunity to grow your nest egg.
Yeah, it's very interesting about the diverse views around retirement. And then your work focuses on economic policies and how different parts of society are impacted by these. Can you talk a little bit more about this and what you've seen on the topic of retirement?
We already know about the gender pay gap, and in South Africa, it's sitting at approximately 20%. But this gender pay gap also translates into a retirement savings gap because your retirement fund contributions are a function of your salary. So if you're earning less, then you're contributing less. And so while we want to believe that economic policies are gender neutral, the truth is that they're still very gender biased because women take on a lot more unpaid work than their male counterparts, and they're taking time off to care for children or aging parents. And while this type of work is important and it satisfies a need, it goes unremunerated. And if we're adding mom tax into this equation and missed opportunities to apply for promotion because of intermittent labor market participation, what we end up seeing is a lag in policy response to account for the career trajectories of women who then are more likely to have inadequate savings for their retirement and increasingly are becoming at risk of experiencing poverty at retirement age.
Yeah, very interesting from that perspective. Let me go to Dion now. Dion, part of what you do is assisting companies to embrace change and embedding culture of innovation into corporate operating systems. Why is it so important to embrace change, and what challenges do you encounter when trying to achieve this at a corporate level?
People talk about the velocity of change, especially after the pandemic, the watershed moment that the world went into, that suddenly we had to, after lockdown, especially companies and corporate companies had to embrace that velocity of change. But I think the velocity of change has been going for quite a few years. The pandemic served as a pause and a distraction, if you'd like. And I think what we didn't realize was that that rate of change or the duration of change was tethered to just ongoing polycrises. It just seems that the world is, spiraling either out of control or it's becoming out of reach. So there has been a convergence of a realization of climate change, of AI, of geopolitics. All of those kind of things have been seen from a distance, but now we understand that even sort of socio-cultural changes which are affected by things are now affecting businesses. So the world of work, the future of work, the flexibility, which then impacts what we're talking about today, kind of retirements, nest eggs, how you want to work, how you want to save, the different demographics of the workforce. All of those things are now starting to hit and impact businesses. And if businesses keep going on a 20th century structure, a corporate structure that was designed for 20th century and not for a digital era, then we are seeing the problems and the conflict that we do within businesses today. So that's why we need to really, really keep up with where we're going. And old systems are dying out at a rapid rate, and we don't seem to address how fast the dying process is.
Dion, in our pre-recording, you mentioned a concept that was very new to me. We probably know it in South Africa as something else, but you mentioned a group that people now refer to as ALICE, which stands for Asset Limited, Income Constrained Employed. You talk to us about this growing trend and the impacts of it both now and in the future.
Yeah, it's a really worrying trend that you're seeing come out from North America generally. But like you said, it's not new to South Africa. In South Africa, we call it the missing middle, especially when we were discussing movements like fees must fall, and we're looking at that missing middle. So ALICE is a global mirror of that. So these are people who have a job, they're employed, they are asset limited, so they do have assets, so they've got a car, they're employed, but income constrained, meaning they can't afford to pay or no longer can afford to pay rent. So they are forced to live in their cars. And what we've picked up in terms of a global trend are churches and supermarkets opening their spaces, their parking lots, to people who are classified as ALICE for the evening. So there will be public facilities that you can maybe have a wash, go to the toilet, but you are safe and secure. But, come 6 o'clock when business starts again, you are obliged to move on. You can probably return that evening. But it illustrates a larger slide of people going into a gap of inequity. So you're seeing bizarre things like a student in Canada who has lectures in Vancouver and is registered at the university, but lives in Calgary. And it's cheaper for him, because you can now do online lectures, cheaper for him to fly to Vancouver several times a week rather than rent a place there. So the economic models are starting to skew. So as they say, the math don't math anymore. And this is obviously going to have a huge impact on people's savings, how you retire, if you retire, can you retire, all of those questions.
Very, very worrying trend indeed. Next, we're going to listen to a clip about the changing world of work from Pop Tech, and then I'll ask you to share your thoughts on what you hear.
This world of information abundance is really defined on the one hand by this sense of being overwhelmed by constant communications and this constant flood of data and us having to cope with it. And on the other hand, it's defined by the immense creative possibilities.
So I think what we're seeing is that the world of work is undergoing what I call a structural shift. How do we lead in this world? How do we create value? How do we organize ourselves, our organizations, our companies, obviously, to be able to generate value collectively?
How do we create a culture that allows for experimentation so that failure isn't punished? How do we budget in a world where we're changing priorities rapidly? How do we assign resources? How do we do management? There are so many challenges that people are slowly working through in this new world.
The reality is I don't think enough organizations realize what's at stake here. We see right around the world examples of organizations who have failed to change. And so I think a lot of this change inside organizations is not about whether they're going to be successful or not. It's actually whether they're going to survive.
Maybe let's start with you, Bomikazi. What are your thoughts just hearing those clips?
I'm really hearing significant themes coming through, not just in terms of how the future of work is changing, but how it could potentially have a domino effect on the retirement landscape. We know that consumers are under significant financial strain. We're inundated with financial information, and now having to find ways in which we can filter out the noise, organize financial information in a way that's going to improve well-being. This is particularly more interesting to those who are previously financially excluded, right? We've made significant strides in making sure people are financially included, they have access to banking facilities, but there still has to be a lot more work that's done in terms of engaging long-term financial planning and making financial information accessible and inclusive to everyone. And this is where I think everyone has their part to play. The government, the education system, retirement fund administrators, and even employers, especially in big business, where we're seeing a lot of emphasis being placed on ESG reporting. But this speaks to the S, right, in ESG, that social impact is needed to reform the way we think, the way we plan, the way we save for retirement, and ensure that those who don't have access to the traditional modes of saving aren't left destitute.
Yeah, quite right there. Dion, your thoughts?
Yeah, this is music to my ears and my daily grind, because this is what I'm trying. I try and give these talks. I lecture at business schools to try and not convince people, but to really show how rapid the change is happening within corporate culture as well. I said at the beginning that the pandemic was this watershed moment, and you are starting to see. So I'll put another layer of what Bomikazi just said. It's not just the financial thing, but it's that sort of socio-cultural attitude towards the future of work. So we've done at Flux Trends, sort of 15 years we've been tracking Gen Z. So they are like fully into your workforce now. It's a part of the major conflict between Gen Zs or otherwise millennial managers or Gen X managers or leadership. And it illustrates a completely different way of working, a completely different way of looking at authority, and a completely different way of looking at output. So the Gen Z mantra before the pandemic was, I don't want a job, I want a lifestyle. The second one is, work is not a place I go to, work is what I do. Leadership then scoffed at that and said, well, that's just how entitled can you be? And then post-pandemic, we're all saying, well, actually, you've got a point. So we're seeing this seismic shift that's happening and being driven by this generation. And when people say, we can't deal with this generation, I always point out to them that the issues that this generation are fighting for within a corporate structure, to change a corporate structure, are not just for that generation. They're fighting for the whole company. They're fighting for everybody in that to have those same flexibilities, the same thing. So if you think of it, what I think most older leadership are used to is a very transactional way of time exchange in terms of work. You're the employee, I'm the employer, and you are my asset, and I pay you for that time. It's completely changed in terms of how do I fulfill a purpose? How do I nurture and grow you as a person within that workforce, and how do we make it all better? And Bomikazi, really zoned in on one thing, which was mental health. And that was never discussed before. And suddenly it is not only discussed, but it is something that is recognized and something that we need to speak about.
You're talking really about dramatic shifts in terms of the employment patterns. Now, maybe let's turn to now talking about this word of retirement, which you've mentioned a few times already. It's something that younger generations are not really relating to. And I think, because you mentioned it at the start, as a concept in many ways. So perhaps we're talking life after formal employment, or is maybe a better term. What are your thoughts on this? Maybe Dion first.
I have been looking or following a gerontologist called Ken Ditchwald, and he wrote a book about what retirees really want, life's third age. And that phrase, life's third age, really, really intrigued me. And when I started looking into it, it makes complete sense. So life's third age, if you splice your life into 3 ages, birth to 30, developmental ages, 30 to 60, your professional, personal development, family, career, all of those kind of things. And now turning 90 is no longer an anomaly. So 60 to 90 is life's third age. Whereas, again, all of the old algorithms and how you've worked out retirement is you retire at 60 or 65. So what on earth now do you do for another 2 decades of good cognitive ability, good physical ability? But there are also different layers to that. So your retirement, I prefer to call it rewirement, because that actually, as soon as you say that to people, because people fear retirement more than they fear death. So if you say, rather think of it as rewirement, you see the kind of the light bulbs go on around them. And so it's like, what do you really want to do? Because specifically the demographic that's starting to retire now are the same demographic that put their entire lives and personas into their careers. So once you take that away, they don't really know what to do, and that hence the huge fear.
Rewirement, that's quite a term there. Bomikazi, I mean, maybe just your thoughts on that, but also maybe if you can just touch on, is it going to be possible to have what we call a retirement in the future? What are we going to do around this reframing?
Yeah, I think, Dion has mentioned such excellent points that, worldwide, we're seeing populations aging, and this is fantastic because it means we're living longer and healthier lives. But coupled with that, it means now our finances have to be long and healthy as well. And so I think, when we're having this conversation, it's such an interesting opportunity to think about the attitude towards retirement and the associations come with it. And while I was listening to Dion talking, I just remember how retirement is always packaged, right? It's this older couple walking on the beach, holding hands, staring into the sunset, which is a beautiful thing, but it doesn't connect and resonate with everyone. And so, I think one of the key takeaways that any of the listeners should think about here is, if that word doesn't resonate with you, or at least that visual doesn't resonate with you, what could you substitute in its place? I think of it then as an opportunity to not just reframe the word retirement, but reframe what it is that you're imagining for your life, right? That third age Dion was referring to earlier. A lot of people, because we're living longer and healthier lives, we're going to the gym as an investment in our physical and mental health. But then, planning for retirement is also an investment in your financial health. That if you start doing it now, it's something that's going to pay dividends in future. And just undertaking that small shift in the way in which you think of it as an investment in your financial future can really shift the narrative around the word.
Yeah. I want to touch on some of your work that you do in the South African context, where we've got employers that really provide these retirement arrangements, and most employees are in there, and that's all the savings that they do. What does this mean for them? What we're talking about now, reframing that ordinary South African that's in an employment provident or pension fund.
This is the thing about, coming off of the back of the COVID pandemic and seeing the great resignation, where after COVID, people just realized, hang on, this job that I was in, it's not doing the things anymore, or this was a great opportunity for me to just reimagine what I want to do with my life since, COVID had happened. And so we're seeing a really big shift in the way in which people see their engagement with the labor market, but also their engagement with their long-term financial planning. And what I think needs to happen here is maybe even a diversification in our thinking when it comes to the traditional ways of saving, because, people have left their jobs, they're starting up that business that they've always wanted to start, or reimagining how they actually make money and earn their income. And if that's the case, then we're seeing a gap in the market for this type of demographic, right? People who are looking for flexible work arrangements, or maybe who want to save and are looking for more flexible saving structures and the kinds of financial products that would then service their needs. And so there's absolutely a gap, and I think even a missed opportunity to see how financial products are also catching up with how the future of work is shifting.
Yeah, I just want to put an extra layer onto what Bomikazi just said, is if you also stand back and look at what a career trajectory means to a younger demographic or a younger generation compared to an older generation, is completely different. For an old generation, it was a very linear one. You go to school, you go to university. If you're adventurous, maybe you change your job 2, possibly 3 times in your career, and then you retire, and then you go to where the birds go after that. Now you're starting to see, people look at a career portfolio. You jump lanes between different disciplines and sectors, because now you're starting to see with the future of work, what you have studied or what your skill is now applied to very different sectors that you never thought you would be able to get into. And I'm very fortunate because I have a personal case study here. My niece, who lives in New York, has done this. She has upskilled herself. She's in her 30s now, but during her 20s and early 30s, she upskilled herself 3 times. She kept changing lanes and doing things. So you take a small sabbatical, you go for further education, you get into the work, you sort of have a side hustle, you have another little sort of mini sabbatical, you study something else, and you build this career portfolio around you, which is completely different to, okay, I'll work, I'll save, and then this is going to be my retirement, and that's what I do. So the work pattern itself for coming up generations, and we've already started on Generation Alpha, which are the children of the millennials, is going to be so radically different to what the corporate structures and financial services really allow for at the moment.
This is exactly what I'm saying. And I'm so happy that Dion and I are on the same page, because we're talking about shifts in terms of the future of work, where people are looking to upskill and reskill, but financial products aren't keeping up. For example, if you leave your employer and you want to continue saving, you're probably going to put your pension or your provident fund into a preservation fund. But we know with that preservation fund, no ongoing contributions can be made. So then what are you going to do? Maybe take out a retirement annuity fund. Maybe you find another employer, again, as Dion had mentioned, you change lanes and they have their own pension fund. And so you're sitting with 3 different retirement products with 3 different structures. You're incurring fees across the board, and they're not really working for you. And so why are we still doing things the way in which they've always been done, when in actual fact, they're not necessarily aligning with the needs of the consumer? They're changing career trajectories, because at the end of the day, the financial product is supposed to be there to support the financial needs and financially empower the employee. And so with this change in the future of work, we need to see a change in financial products as well to reflect the future of work.
I couldn't agree with you more. Innovation on the products, because employment patterns are changing and the ways of earning income are changing. The ways of saving also need to follow. And I was going to ask you, there are some people that think the future is so uncertain. Is there a point in saving or investing for what we call retirement or rewirement or a third life?
Yeah, I'm going to be biased because, this is my advocacy. Financial planning is such a personal undertaking. It's a reflection of your own attitudes, your values, your goals. And while we may not know what the future holds, there are so many lessons to be learned from the past. And Dion mentioned that COVID came along and showed us that even the most stable households can be financially vulnerable. Irrespective of your stance of saving or investing, there's still powerful tools in building financial resilience and providing a financial cushion to absorb any unexpected shocks. And truth be told, it's not something we talk about often, but, money can depress you, or the lack thereof. Money causes stress, money causes anxiety. It causes so much angst and shame, especially indebtedness, that, people find themselves in the debt trap, maybe even a victim of financial abuse. And I'm going a little bit off topic here, but I'm really just trying to illustrate how something as simple as savings and being consistent in putting that cushion away can make a huge difference in terms of your financial and mental well-being.
What does your research show about families in the future? Will more middle-class families abandon the nuclear family and go back to more community living to support the older generations? Your thoughts, and then we can go to Dion as well, just to give us a view from his trends perspective.
Yeah, well, from the South African context and many places around the world, we're seeing the prominence of what we call the sandwich generation emerging. And that speaks to a generation of people who not only have to take care of their own children, but also have to financially support aging parents, aunties, uncles, whatever the case may be, which we know then, puts finances under strain. But within the African culture, I think it's very interesting to appreciate that your children are your retirement plan, right? There's no disassociating your finances from your family, because it's so deeply embedded within the value system of the African culture. And what we're seeing in the research, and I think it's so exciting to see that there's been a shift in the discourse around Africanizing financial planning and what that means within the African context when the role of family is so intertwined with finances. And so the needs of the family, just irrespective of what that family structure may look like, are being increasingly recognized in financial planning processes. So whether we're going to go back to community living or abandon the nuclear family from the South African context, I don't think so. In fact, I think what we're going to see is the recognition that families are part of financial planning structures, and we need to formalize that.
Yeah, I just want to echo what Bomikazi said. So we did a small project just before the elections called the 30-30-30 project. So it was a very small sampling. We had 30 very deep conversations with under 30s, 30 years into democracy. And one of the things that we found was that demographic were very open to leaving South Africa for opportunity, but they would always come back. When Bomikazi talks about that family bond, that came through very, very strongly indeed. On the other hand, if I put my trends hat on and just look globally now, is the whole shift in social contract. So yes, you mentioned the change of the nuclear family. There is a growing movement around the world of a child-free movement, so not a childless movement. So people opting not to have children because A, it's too expensive, B, the world's just too crazy. I don't want to bring children into this. And also you're just starting to see that there's also a very definite skew in emerging and developing markets where women are feeling more empowered. And you can see this politically as well. There's a fork in the road. So younger women who are becoming more empowered are voting more liberal and towards the left, whereas young men feel disempowered and they're voting more towards the right and conservative. Where this plays out in that family unit is going to be very, very significant, because if you have delayed parenting already, if you're having a childless movement, then the whole structure of what Bomikazi was saying is very embedded in the South African culture. But what happens when you have generations who have a borderless mindset and suddenly those things start dissolving and disappearing? So I'm talking deep in the future there, but there are things that we can start pondering about now.
We can't close without you just sharing your thoughts around trends over the next sort of 50 to 100 years. And also maybe from a South African context. I mean, you've spoken about the Alice grouping. From a South African or an African context, give us some thoughts around where trends are going in this vein.
Okay, I'll start off wide and global as well. And just coming off of what Bomikazi just said is, I'll put another generational skew onto that. If you look at that lovely term, zillennials, so millennials and Generation Z lumped into one, you work hard, you'll be able to buy a house and a car and then retire. They've kissed that goodbye long ago. For those two generations, that's not going to happen. The world has shifted so dramatically. Paying off things, student debt is another one. I won't get started on that because we'll be here for the next 2 hours on education. But on the one hand, you've got two generations saying they're not going to be able to do what their parents or their grandparents did because the world has changed. But then if you come to Africa and South Africa, so South Africa, obviously we've got a dual economy. It's very, very complex. But generally, if you look at the future of the African continent, it's a very, very young continent. It's a millennial Gen Z, a very squarely Gen Z, and probably going to be a huge Gen Alpha generation. So if we get to the convergence of connectivity, technology, we're going to see radical leapfrogs from this continent because they're going to do things completely, completely different. Dare I say it, if you look at what's happening politically, you have older leadership that just refuse to go. But in the next 50 years, in the next 10 years, that's going to go away or they will be pushed out. And so you will start seeing radical changes happening on the continent. So I'm very, very happy that I live on the continent because that future is squarely, in my point of view, going to come from an African continent. The youth demographic compared to the aging demographics around the world really sort of signals well for us if we make sure that we invest in specifically the Generation Alphas. I think it's 1 in 4 children in South Africa, the Gen Alphas, are under 5, are stunted. That's not good. That's not going to give no economic growth for the country. So we have to invest in that generation already, while we're also trying to invest in new ways of retirement or rewirement.
I'm going to go to our cornerstone question that we ask our guests. And basically, we're saying, what do you think, Bomikazi, we haven't said about this topic today?
One of the things I hope that the listeners will reflect on is really just interrogating our assumed knowledge, the things we take as gospel when it comes to retirement and the financial implications that come with it. But more than that, to take inventory of your financial situation and have a look at where there may be chinks in your financial armor. Because even though, life is moving at the speed of light, we know we can't afford to be complacent with our finances, and we really need to be intentional about aligning our financial plans with our financial goals. So whether you need to retire, the word retire, sit down and ask yourself, what does this word mean to me? What associations come with it? How do I reframe it so that, I can use it as an opportunity to empower myself and reconfigure my finances in terms of meeting whatever that future goal may be. Hopefully that this podcast provided the opportunity to do that.
Thank you. Dion, your thoughts? What haven't we said today?
Okay, you gave me that window of opportunity, so I'm going to take it and talk about skills and education because it is linked. I mean, if we're talking about the future of work and we're talking about sort of how that leads to retirement, then if I go all the way back to the beginning about kind of the skills for the future of work, then there's a huge disconnect that's happening here. So specifically in a South African context, you have an emerging middle class where in many cases, you've got that the first person in that family to go to tertiary education, to get that degree, and the parents sacrifice everything in order for that person to be able to get the opportunities that they didn't have. What we're seeing now is, and it's always a contentious thing, but it's one of my favorite topics, is what is that degree worth? So, it's been promised that, once you get that piece of paper, the doors of opportunity will just be flung wide open and you're going to be sitting all cushy and then your future is secure. However, we've seen from, the pandemic it laid so many things bare, is the final audit for the social grant, the relief fund. So to apply for a 350 Rand grant during the pandemic, the final audit came out that 800,000 people in South Africa who had tertiary education all applied for a 350 Rand grant. Something is not right. So, when people say, oh, no, but you've got to have a degree, all of those kind of things, we are starting to see around the world, but you're going to start seeing it in South Africa as well. The paying off of the student loans is not giving you a return of investment of what you are going to get. And then if you layer onto that, the future of work is changing so fast, those academic ways and means of getting that skill. I'm not saying degrees are obsolete. I'm just saying for the future of work, they're not the be all and end all of it. So even the World Economic Forum are advocating micro-credentials, short courses, which in a country like South Africa would level the playing field somewhat. So there's short courses which are affordable. So whether it's age, gender, affordability, it flattens the playing field and people are able to, they call it a digital backpack of skills. And for me, that makes the most sense, not only in terms of return of investment of what you're trying to do, but also become employable because you have this sort of wide range of skills, which is what companies are going to start wanting very, very soon.
This has been an absolutely fascinating conversation. I've really enjoyed the conversation with both of you. So thank you, Bomikazi, for joining us today. It's been great having you.
Thank you for having me.
Great. Dion, thank you so much. Always great hearing from you and the future trends. Thank you again for being with us.
Great. Thank you so much for having us. It was a great conversation.
3 reasons why retirement savings are still relevant for your employees today and in the future. Firstly, according to Old Mutual's analysis, the 2-pot system could enable workers starting at the age of 25 to build up retirement savings 2 to 3 times greater than those under the old system. Secondly, the new legislation requires 2/3 of retirement savings from the 1st of September 2024 to purchase an annuity, which will provide regular income after retiring. Thirdly, employees can withdraw from their savings component annually without leaving employment, addressing the economic reality for many South Africans. Reach out to us today to find out more about how we can help you ensure that your retirement fund members reach their best possible outcomes. If you enjoyed this episode of Big Business Insights, please like, follow, and subscribe. Also sign up to receive the monthly newsletter from Old Mutual Corporate.